I'd like to welcome you here tonight. Tonight we're going to hear first from Maureen Williams, who will be telling us about the special collections here at St. FX. Maureen?
Well, we are very fortunate to have a special collections in our library, and this particular special collection consists of a Celtic collection. And I'd just like to draw your attention to the two display cases in this room. You may like to have a look at the items later on. Just give a brief rundown of the contents of these two cases, because they contain, for the most part, a number of early Scottish Gaelic publications. And most of these, at least the items in the 51, collection of poetry by Alistair MacDonell, Alexander MacDonald, the Asheri na Sean Chanan Albanoch, and this is very rare, and there are only a few of these left in the world. My reference for a lot of these poetry collections comes from Donald MacLean's Typographia Scoto-Gaelica, and he says that most of them were burned in Edinburgh shortly after they were published, and at the date of the publication of the Typographia, there were only 12 in existence at that time, and we're lucky enough to have one of them. And the copy that we have was donated to the library by Sir Compton Mackenzie. Apparently, there is a more rare edition of this book, the 1764 edition, the second edition, and there seems to be only one copy of that in existence, but we don't have that one yet.
There is a distinguished ghost looking on over this assembly tonight. The person whose portrait faces you there would have been utterly delighted to welcome all of you and to know that the Hall of the Clans and his university would attract such a distinguished group of scholars and visitors. Angus L. MacDonald was one of the great graduates of this university, and it will be of interest to the Harvard students here to know that he was also a doctor from that university. There's something about this meeting that makes me think that his spirit is right here. We also, in addition, getting back to Earth again, I want to say that we have some very distinguished people, and I can't begin to enumerate all of them. Well, you're all worthy people, as Shakespeare would say. But we're especially honored to have with us tonight the Irish ambassador to Canada, I hope I haven't ruined that. Now, I get on to the chore of the evening, and it's appropriate to introduce that with the old language. Hashin kajara tolisha anoch, gavelan dunyosul, karchal, eunsichtje, a sar vaart, Sorley MacLean, leo, goin, a kut jan vaartig ege heen. Na big poun or, een doorn, gachun ha seo, mar a bha ag gavarin eloset. Vi go fách go ma traum a togachi, gan yellen skiernach. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a great honor to present our distinguished guest this evening, Dr. Sorley MacLean. We are especially happy at St. FX to welcome him back here. His first visit was in 1978, at which time he gave a public reading, which was declared by all the people present, academics and townspeople and other visitors as the highlight of the academic year here. It's just one indication of how very effective real art is. Even if we don't understand the language or the medium, there is something about art that touches the human spirit, and certainly Sorley's presentation that night illustrated that. Now, Dr. MacLean is no stranger to many of us here, but for the benefit of those who are not familiar with his career, you will be interested in knowing something of his background. He was born in the Isle of Raasay, off the east coast of the Isle of Skye, and the MacLean household was very much favored by Providence with an enormous array of gifts. The medical world, the literary world, the world of folklore, the Gaelic world generally, all have benefited from the gifts of that family, which they shared so generously with the rest of the world. Dr. MacLean is a graduate of the University of Edinburgh, and after graduation he took up a post as teacher, and then he served in the Second World War in the North African campaign, was wounded, and luckily recovered after several months of hospitalization, and returned to teaching and spent many years as headmaster of the school in Ploughton until 1971, I believe. In the meantime, of course, the world of poetry had come to recognize that there was a luminary in that world. And after the publication of his first collection in 1943, it became quite obvious that Scottish Gaelic poetry would never be the same again. He brought it into this mainstream of poetry, and critics, much more erudite and competent than I, have recognized the extraordinary quality of the poetry, as have universities who have conferred honors on Dr. MacLean, and even the Queen of England and Scotland, who in 1991 awarded him the gold medal for poetry. And as I said in the old language, for those who didn't understand, if each of us had a gold medal in our hand tonight, his pockets would be quite heavy going back home to the Isle of Skye. So without further ado, I give you Dr. Sorley MacLean.
I'm greatly honored to be here, to be asked to read here for the second time. And even if I had never been here, if I were never here, I would be greatly indebted to this university for the honor they did to my brother Callum, who died in 1960. And they did him a very great honor when such a thing was, well, I suppose one could say he needed it most then. And so actually, I am very, very glad to be here. Now I am going to read, and I usually read, and if all the audience cannot understand Scottish Gaelic, I usually read translation in English before reading the Gaelic poem. The translations I read are tonight are all by myself. Now the first one I'm going to read is called in Gaelic Goiridh Dòmhnallach. Now, those of you who know Gaelic will know that Goiridh is a wonderful word. It can mean a cry of lamentation, pain, and so on. For instance, the famous Goiridh Dòmhnallach, the lament for John, the chief of the MacLeans, who died in 1715. But it can also mean something like an electric shock put through one. No, not quite an electric shock, not so violent, but it can mean that with us in Skye at the same time. Now, this poem, I'm going to read a poem I made during the Spanish Civil War, when I expected, with the German menace and all that the fascists were going to take over Europe. In 1937, I met an Irish girl. I was introduced to her by my best friend, who gave me to believe, well, who unconsciously made me, or perhaps consciously, told me that he wanted to marry her. And to tell you the truth, I was quite decent. Well, of course. I was quite decent because I had no chance. But then I said to myself, if it were a question of this girl or the battlefield, I'm afraid it would be the girl, I said to myself. She didn't marry my friend. She married somebody else. And, well, there's one reference that I want to explain. The slave ship I refer to is called in Gaelic Soch. We say Soch in Skye, or Seach, instead of Soich or Seach. Nandunya. It was a ship that in 1739 was kidnapping young people, young men and young women from Skye and other islands, to sell them as indentured labourers in, well, I suppose the West Indies and the Carolinas, so on. And there's some poignant stories about that. Of course, the word, it refers also to all the slave ships that have ever been. I'll read an English translation first. Girl of the yellow, heavy yellow, gold yellow hair, the song of your mouth and Europe's shivering cry, fair, heavy-haired, spirited, beautiful girl, the disgrace of our day would not be bitter in your kiss. Would your song and splendid beauty take from me the dead loathsomeness of these ways, the brute and the brigand at the head of Europe, and your mouth red and proud with the old song? Would fair body and forehead son take from me the foul black treachery, spite of the bourgeois and poison of their creed, and the feebleness of our dismal Scotland? Would beauty and serene music put from me the sore frailty of this lasting cause, the Spanish miner leaping in the face of sorrow, and his great spirit going down untroubled? What would the kiss of your proud mouth be compared with each drop of the precious blood that fell on the cold, frozen uplands of Spanish mountains from the columns of steel? What every lock of your gold yellow head to all the poverty, anguish, and grief that will come and have come on Europe's people from the slave ship to the slavery of the whole people. Now, people have often asked me where the rhythm has come from. The rhythm of the Gaelic, I don't know. En een chool voor haun voor arve, found of oils is gurn a harpe. En een gal hasserlach, eierig, waaiig, had een masliger laanje scherf nat faigse. En doe town of taljach glorve, voam ze kraanlach, varam een oisja. Vrood som jarlach kaun harpe, stavial se oel jarek sin jaun oran. En doe kartgal was Clark grene, voam se kalakarach gune prene, nie lordja zich as poins an kreje, is diebleach gar nalap en eetje. En gruppage is kjol swijmlich, voam se praatjach en overwoonja. A man of Spanje gelemri kroatal is anamor als Scotia's gun broaljen. Even pop de bjaal uivrig mariskach brunjen ulwach var a hoogje ruimten raat de voren am jan Spanje voor arne kroag. Jegach koch jet goe war voiriskach boch in jager storing a hikse haneke slag na harpe wel launen in je good those of all. I should have told you that I am of a family of pipers and singers, and I can't sing a note, and I am terribly fond of song, especially most of our Gaelic song. And so that is one thing. Now I'm going to read something very different. I was very fond of boats when I was young, but about the age of 20 I gave up. Well, I didn't give them up, but I took to the mountains, Hollands and Skye, instead of the boats. Now, we had a little boat, my father had a little boat, about 13, 14 feet, which was a wonderful sailor and very safe. Even I didn't manage to capsize it, and people told me often I would. It was beautifully cut under, you know, well, at any rate, this little thing, I read a lot of Greek in translation. I didn't know Greek, but my 4 brothers did. I didn't. But I was fascinated at that time with Greek things, the Homeric stories. And there's a reference to the long black ships that Odysseus brought over from Ithaca, and Alexander MacDonald's Clanranald, the burling of Clanranald, right? Black boat, perfect Greek, sail tack, sail belly full and white, and you yourself complete in craft, silent, spirited, flawless, your course smooth, sorrowless, unfeeling. They were no more skilled black ships that Odysseus sailed over from Ithaca, or Clanranald over from Uist, those on a wine dark sea, these on a grey-green brine. Bata tú, bata vík, bata gui, grey Hollande, Cloas, Shul, Balak Shul, Lana Skell, agus tú heen go forfach, Jalante, Sach, Oorlog, gan Geaf, gan Gash, de Hoorseree, gan Vroon, gan Erachel, Hapiats en Langish, Goehe, Jalante, a Hjal, Odysseus, en Aula, Ithaca, no mach ich gala en an Aula, uist, Kut morfian garache, skut sham, wine glass. Now, I'll try another thing. The next one is a noisy poem about mountains. It's called Canlochainert. Pleasant sky surrounded by mountains. This is Canlochainert on what we would call in Gaelic Lán Sheach Shean, with wind and rain, swirling mist, which made the mountain tops appear and disappear as if they were moving. And there's a kind of surrealism about it. But well, and again, I think the rhythm's unusual. The English translation I'll read first. There's a name of one of the high passes there, is Bealach Moscari, and has scree, but it is also very green patches. A company of mountains, an upthrust of mountains, a great garth of growing mountains, a concourse of summits, of knolls, of hills coming on with a fearsome roaring, a rising of glens, of gloomy corries, a lying down on the antlered bellowing, a stretching of green nooks of brook mazes, prattling in the age-old midwinter, a cavalry of mountains, horse-riding summits, a streaming headlong haste of foam, a slipperiness of smooth flat rocks, small-bellied bare summits, flat rocks snoring of high mountains, a surge belt of hilltops, impetuous thigh of peaks, the murmuring bareness of marching turrets, green flanks of Moscari, crumbling storm flanks, barbarous pinnacles of high moorlands. Just a difficulty of translation. We have a wonderful word in Gaelic, I suppose it's in Irish too, shang, meaning slim, especially in the belly. And it's very often used of horses and that. And why have to put a clumsy thing in the translation like small-bellied? Shang is wonderful. You know the song, Maid el Allen mach ich galen Margaret nanech shange shulmach, so on. Call founded, Scotia founded, Corley's founded, Fosfor, Crunioch and Hulligan leif, Chins weich, ich gabi, Ering Landen, Chorachan oud, Wel Wyas Moody, Chach, Sheene, Chloaniac and Huaniac and Stroolach, Bredels and Olach Garry, Echri Landen, Markach, Wullichin, Jowry, Ruhanach Caher, Schleunach, Lechgan and Shengach, Crechanin, Straurich, Lechgan, Hartwian, Anachris, Wullichin, Conachris, Hullichin, Monor, Loim, Horetjan, Marshall, Gorom, and Moscari, Sterim, and Moscanach, Borofit and Bonnie and Arthur. Well, those were made before the war. Started in 1939. In 1939, now I know people shouldn't read in public readings of verse. It's not good to read one's, well, certain type of poems, but I'm afraid I do it. In December 39, as I was waiting to go into the army, I had a I was faced with a tragedy, a terrible tragedy about a woman. And I thought she had a dreadful illness. It turned out in the end that I was wrong, but the thought lasted for 2 years. But there was nothing I could give her but poems, which wouldn't be much good. A week or so after hearing that, I got up out of bed at about 3 o'clock in the morning and wrote down 2 things as fast as I could. I think I composed them in my sleep. The first one is not good. Some people have told me the second one is fairly good. It's called Cognes MacDonell. Across eternity, across its snows, I see my unwritten poems. I see the spore of their paws dappling the untroubled whiteness of the snow. Bristles raging, bloody tongue, gleam grounds and wolves leaping over the tops of the dikes, running under the shade of the trees of the wilderness, taking the defile of narrow glens, making for the steepness of windy mountains. Their baying yells shrieking across the hard barenesses of the terrible times, their everlasting barking in my ears, their onrush seizing my mind. Career of wolves and eerie dogs, swift in pursuit of the quarry, through the mountains without veering over them, through the forests without veering, over the mountain tops without shearing, the mild mad dogs of poetry, wolves in chase of beauty, beauty of soul and face, a white deer over hills and plains, the deer of your gentle beloved beauty, a hunt without halt, without respite. Cognes MacDonell. Arnasiuriach Carishnechte chi me moga echte chi me lorach an a spoke a brechke gilahoim nach an trechke Kalak volle tinge falle geuhules MacDonell a leem har mulligen a garg a ruif a skaal en groen fasel a gaal konk en hoog laun Gire cashit na ngúb iawn, a wagan galannach a sianel, her woman croen an awn cianel, an hord eich vivan am a chloas, an iawn roi a gal ma wagan, reis na matus na honi gal gloa her torach gan iagich, tron a cailjan gan iarag, her mulligan am iawn gan hiarag, con hiwn a cuich na bardach, Matin torn a háileach, gáileach go nanamas an údin, fiag gel har bheann as rúndin, fiag de báich a cúngulich, fiag gan scúr, gan úchag. Now, there is another one which doesn't seem so tragic, but is. It's called a mór goram. Mór, you know, it's a word meaning a rampart, a fortified wall, from the Latin morus. Now, though I say it myself, Skye has a very varied, a very spectacular, and almost what you might call a heroic scenery with its mountains. And one of them most remarkable, of course, the Coolin Hills, which are like the Alps on a small scale, and there's places like Talisker. Now, I know Talisker is a difficult word to use because of the whiskey, but the distillery is 7 or 8 miles from Talisker, which is a wonderful bay with great stretches of sand and huge cliffs. The actual distillery that makes the whiskey. One has to tell that because, well, the associations with the whiskey are not the right ones, you know. There's one thing I want to... I use the phrase crúbling head, the tree of strings. Now, it was used as a kenning for music. The strings, of course, are the harp strings, and hence it could be used loosely for poetry, art of any kind. Now, I may say that the great Willie Matheson thinks that the crew means the wooden key of the harp rather than the tree, but whether he's right or wrong, most people think crúbling head means the tree of the harp strings, and use it as a kind of it's a kind of symbol. But for you the Cullen would be an exact and serrated blue rampart girdling with its march wall all that is in my fierce heart. But for you the sand that is in Talisker compact and white would be a measureless plain to my expectations, and on it the spear desire would not turn back. But for you the oceans and their unrest and their repose would raise the wave crests of my mind and settle them on a high serenity. And the brown brindled moorland and my reason would coextend, but you imposed on them an edict above my own pain. And on a distant luxuriant summit there blossomed the tree of strings, among its leafy branches your face, my reason, and the likeness of a star. I ought to have told you that this was another girl, and I felt a conflict with her because there was a conflict between, she was alien in a way, in a lot of ways. Conflict between her and my West Highlander Skye ethos. She was the one in the Dog and Wolves story. The Gaelic is here. Mar a bewse the Gunculihan a bone reker a gorom, the Christlach is level a creech and a hanam chri a borob. Mar bewse the Ganyu and Haloskur doel gal na clar bivern gam a golin nach chile goron ga. Smart bewse the na quanten and loalskans nan hav, the togal car ma bogan ga correshoimnes art. Svega monas down riavach agus do heel cohinj. Achorúsa or a real agus cilm of fianna hín. Agus crechain chéin as for chéin fláv or crún in héad. A mengach dúlich túdan, mo chéal was agus réad. I'll read one more of that type. But, and then, it's called Cavanagh, Dawn. I was fascinated with the Cullen Hills. I used to wander about alone on the tops. Just, well, before the war, but with the war I had to stop it. And I referred, the sound of Rasay, that is the sea between the little island of Rasay and the mainland of Skye, well, the southern part of it, which is called the Clara, is, I think, by all standards, very beautiful. Most people agree with me. You were dawn on the Cullen and benign day on the Clara, the sun on his elbow in the golden stream and the white rose that breaks the horizon. Glitter of sails on a sunlit firth, blue of the sea and aureate sky, the young morning in your head of hair and your clear, lovely cheeks. My jewel of dawn and night, your face and your dear kindness, though the grey stake of misfortune is thrust through the breast of my young morning. Cavanagh, but though Cavanagh a chulihan, slas lever a chlarich, grian a chulin as an who agus rá scal bristu thare, wanir hjólar linga grianich gorom a chuan is mas jarvoy, and all kvatin at the chualen, snap a groain salyaralen, Moleg Cavanagh is eiche, túden stochines grach, get a beer glas and always trochlia moch matne saatje. Now, I'm going to read a war poem or two. In 1942, in July, I was in a place called Death Valley, where anti-tank with New Zealand infantry, and it was a bad place. The first big counter-offensive, Rommel had been stopped on the Alamein line, and the first big counter-offensive started. And everything went wrong, and there were dreadful casualties. Well, very bad, not according to the First World War, in that place. No doubt it was called Death Valley, but no doubt there were quite a few places in the deserts of Libya and Egypt that were called Death Valley. Now, there, among the many, there was a young German boy. Oh, he looked so young to be a man. He was sitting quite upright, with his feet were in a slit trench. There wasn't a mark on him. He must have been killed by bomb blast or shell blast. And I thought of a caption. Some Nazi or other said that the Führer had restored to German manhood the right and joy of dying in battle. Sitting dead in Death Valley below the Ruiset Ridge, a boy with his forelock down about his cheek and his face slate grey. I thought of the right and the joy that he had from his Führer of falling in the field of slaughter to rise no more, of the pomp and the fame that he had, not alone, though he was the most piteous to see, in a valley gone to seed with flies about grey corpses on a dun sand, dirty yellow and full of the rubbish and fragments of battle. Was the boy of the band who abused the Jews and communists, or of the greater band of those led from the beginning of generations unwillingly to the trial and mad delirium of every war for the sake of rulers? Whatever his desire or mishap, his innocence or malignity, he showed no pleasure in his death below the Ruiset Ridge. The caption is Urtnazager Chorikin, and the Führer Rash, the Irna Garamatje, a chor agus a sonas, baz utingas an arich. Na huye maravan laich gavage, fagruim ruishet giljog, so lokan shias magroi, so hua grishon. Smúnich mir a chors an ag a chware urer, vi tuchtjum an rún an arik an eri tullug, a grúnachus a chlúnach dúar an aunar, get beshin bevrónich a snúan, an weichgar womag le kulak an mochurch gewas gan eich wachting, si salach voies want the reps, the sprúlich cahab. Rangiljar an draum a bab na hiú is na cumanich nó an draum ba bá. Jús an a tháric ag wa hosagáil gun deáid go búar agus brúar an cydich a chwar scathóachran. Ge be Jón san ó chas an nachantas na víran at an och get holach an a vás fa gruim ruiset. Now, I was actually wounded thrice, 3 times, but the first 2 I didn't become a casualty. There was not very much wrong with me really, but the 3rd time I was in hospital nearly 9 months, and I finished up in hospital in Inverness. I was in hospital in Egypt 3 or 4, in South Africa, in England, and finally in Inverness. Now this is a little thing, it's called Roarch, Springtide. It was in, I think, in May 1943. Now, there is what we call Roarch Vornania, the great springtide of the birds. Some say that that's Roarch Vorn of Patrick, but I think it's a one after it. It's when the certain migrants come back, they make their nests in the highest sea rack in the sea rack of the highest tide, because their young will be up and away before the next tide comes. The next tide as high won't come till September, I suppose. Perhaps somebody could put me right. Is it Roarch na Patrick or the one after it? Another thing I wanted to see, Roarch is masculine in the dictionaries. It's feminine in sky. I'm a skier. In case, well, I know there are people who know Gaelic grammar pretty well here. Roarch, again and again when I am broken, my thought comes on you when you are young, and the incomprehensible ocean fills with flood tide and 1,000 sails. The shore of trouble is hidden with its reefs and the rack of grief, and the unbreaking wave strikes about my feet with a silken rubbing. How did the springtide not last, the springtide more golden to me than to the birds? And how did I lose its succour, ebbing drop by drop of grief? Roarch, waar is waar agus mi brieste, ik mis moanjors dus de wal. Is Gianni en Juan doch ik sin le wan maras mi le sjón. Alach kladdach na tripleit le boan en is tjúr of raun. Is boal en haun gan brieste, ma hassen le soa straal. Cymar nach the barry Roarch bwy a gona gan ei hon, a ys a chai mi a coe si traag bwny braun. Now, I better go something else. This, I'm going on to a poem which is called Halig. It's on a place in Rossi. Now, Halig is, according to people who see it, a wonderfully beautiful place. It goes down in green terraces to the sea. It was cleared of all its people by a landlord, I'm glad to say not MacDonell, not MacLeod, who had become bankrupt and had gone away to Australia. It was a man who bought Rossi and cleared 90, he cleared something like 94 families. And Halig, now, it's a strange place. It's strange in this way. Although, of course, it is a wilderness, it's something benign, it's so beautiful about it. And where there were cattle and people once, there are now only sheep. They're not a very big farmer sheep nowadays. They're the ordinary crofter sheep since the First World War. But Halig is where I said there were people and cattle, and now only sheep. The trees, the native trees, birches, hazels, rowans, alders, have reasserted themselves. And they are, in a way, a kind of symbol of an old way of life, but also a symbol of the kind of, desolation, but a strangely benign desolation, and they are contrasted with pine trees that were not native, that were planted by a rich landlord in the 19th century. Now, Hallaig is a place where one gets a feeling of timelessness. Although you feel, the transience, the passing of time, you get the feeling that, some people get it in Hallaig more than any place that I know, the feeling that if a thing has been once, in a sense it always is. And as against that, there is the deer coming in, a symbol of transience. Now, there's one or two things I want to say. A clachan, a lot of people think it's any Highland village, but no, it's the village with the old church, and hence the old churchyard. It's Scoticized, Curtin in a lot of places. There's a clachan of a clachan of O'Halsh, a clachan of Glendale, just as there's Curtin of Glenailey, Curtin of this place and that place. And there's another thing, you'll not understand, Goiridh, that was a patronymic, son of the devotee of Columba, of the MacLeod chiefs of Rossi. The last of them went away in the early 1840s. Hallaig was cleared about the early 1850s. And this was written about 100 years later. There's a caption by myself, "Time the deer is in the wood of Hallaig. The window is nailed and boarded through which I saw the west, and my love is at the burn of Hallaig, a birch tree, and she has always been between Inver and Milk Hollow, here and there about Ballachorn. She is a birch, a hazel, a straight, slender young rowan. In Scrapetle of my people, where Norman and big Hector were, their daughters and their sons are a wood going up beside the stream. Proud tonight the pine cocks crowing on the top of Crochgar, straight their backs in the moonlight. They are not the wood I love. I will wait for the birchwood until it comes up by the cairn, until the whole ridge from Benediche will be under its shade. If it does not, I will go down to Hallaig to the Sabbath of the dead, where the people are frequenting every single generation gone. They are still in Hallaig, MacLeans and MacLeods, all who were there in the time of Goiridh. The dead have been seen alive, the men lying on the green at the end of every house that was. The girls a wood of birches, straight their backs, bent their heads. Between the lech and ferns, the road is under mild moss, and the girls in silent bands go to Clachan as in the beginning, and return from Clachan, from Seishnish and the land of the living, each one young and light-stepping, without the heartbreak of the tale. From the burn of ferns to the raised beach that is clear in the mystery of the hills, there is only the congregation of the girls keeping up the endless walk, coming back to Hallaig in the evening, in the dumb living twilight, filling the steep slopes, their laughter a mist in my ear, and their beauty a film on my heart, before the dimness comes on the Kyles, and when the sun goes down behind Uncana, a vehement bullet will come from the gun of love, and will strike the deer that goes dizzily sniffing at the grass-grown ruined homes. His eye will freeze in the wood, his blood will not be traced while I live. Well, Our Gaelic, Hallaig. A team of fiag and Hallaig. A board just tarning near in the neck trafach me an arginier, some a go like old Hallaig na cree vehe. Svairi of veteran hunners, Polovania, howls of Osma Valachorn, high na behe na Caldin, na Cur and Geirach hang oer. And the scraper o mochini for a tramat sech a mór, a nienan sa mich nan kaya a gael soas rit overloi. O aevrach an och na caligio eisiau geremer mwloch croch gra, dierach an droim rishi gaelig, chaniat yn calia magrai. Fwrig hym eisiau ddehe, gos yn igi mach an carn, gos yn mi yn biara gwlag a fein i ddich fosgael. Mae'r jigs an harnas mi a halag i gyn si sabet na maral, far a fel a slwag a taich gachyn gyn a loch a galal. Had hast an a halag, clon a lens, clon a clod, na fawn ri leinig gyd a chalam, chwnach gys na meref bia. Na fin a laia lianeg e cawn gach teha fawn, na hianan nang hylia beha, dyrach yn droim, crawm yn cawn. Edr y lech gys na fiarno, a rad môr fo chod i hiwn, gys na hianan a matan sa, lachlachan mar a hws, agus y chiliw gys a chlachan a sys ni sa tyr na mi o. A chwle te o gwolach gan dristio cria ysgael. O awr na fiarno gos yn ddwlyn ha syler yn niafrach na miawn. Chanilach cohiol yn ian a cwmel na cosiach gan llawn. Y tilig a halag as y nisgar as y chafan eich falabio. Y lian ag na liad yn casa yn garach grich na chlwys na cio. Sy'n boich yn ysglo her mo chria, mynd i'n ciar ag ar na cwl. Sy'n yr harn ysgrian er cwl yn canna, hig pilar dian a gwna gwyl. Sboel ar y ffiag a hana hwan iawn, snotach na larich yn ffior. Hig rog ar y chwl sy'n chalia, han air loro per urrin fio. It's 9:30 and I forget when I started. I haven't been reading for an hour yet, have I? Huh? Pardon?
Just about.
Well, I better... Nah. Well, I'll finish with another one. I'll read a bit of a longish poem. The legend of MacDonell is, well, it occurs in a few places. There's a MacDonell in Skye, two in Skye, one in which MacCrimmon, the piper of the MacLeods, goes in. There's another into which the MacArthur, the piper of the MacDonell, goes in. And there's one in Mull into which a McKinnon piper goes. Now, the piper goes into the cave, according to the legend. And there are a lot of different reasons given why he goes in. he is heard, his pipes are heard. His pipes are heard speaking. In certain, of course, stories, the piper can be heard. Well, what the pipe says, what the pipe speaks, in a sense, people can understand. Now, he goes in, and he's accompanied by a dog in some legends. And the pipe is heard saying, what is it? Na mi giochka, na fir fechka, monik misha, monjei misha, na mi giochka, na fir fechka, monik misha, wanor, na loive Nang rotara, monik misha, monroik misha, na roi veka, nang rotara, monik misha, uanoj, and na main veka, nang oer chreka, monik misha, monjeir misha, na main veka, nang oer chreka, monik misha, uanoj, moye, country lawn, the lives of Phoebus laws of lew. And then there's a change. Och dan o chrocht, je chrocht. Och dan o chrocht, mo goedjig gemaakt. Och dan o chuan. Och dan o chuan, shigal harig me. I remember my grandmother singing it. She sang it a lot, and she had a very good tune for it. Wish I could. Now, his dog comes back without a hair on it. The Galwayna is the monster inside. Why he goes, and there are a lot of reasons. Now, I deal with it as a kind of people who try, as it were, hopeless and desperate things. People who do, as it were, try to do the next to the impossible, either in thought or in so on. And I'll read the first part of it. I'll read the English. I'll read the Gaelic. I don't think I'll read the English because I've exceeded my hour. Now, I take the Macrimon piper, and the Macrimon Uanor is near the point of Harlosh, looking across the wonderful Loch Bracadale to the Coolins, which is like an upturned boat if you see it from the northwest at a distance. Hai ferrestaya guanor, is chi agi tri lan, nach rogaio as a fee, as in hail as a chlew. Han ik gŵr an wa hen a fee begeach a hori, yet the main veka agus lui go waber coma a viarad. Na mich gúchga an san hua in a mágal ar a máir bóca mar a choin te géim a loi na vein yn meg a brwy. So na verfachga farvel yn heir gorom ar a beal fáiga a draim na fiochlon ikach saif it all an chwach is glamig and the gilfern ben amach geren a stoel van a piepe agus na huikmach krimen heen Miloran met galla liogig de horeschen van a grafurach no royach no chilig Sgynna gwho bwrno tir a un sy'n degas yn hirad. Garsionig agad dwysach clod na brwych yn goromas na mochan na roan na helenis na traen yn haran na niol sa fians yn her môr at er naria yn gwlehan farroeria. Garsionig agad dwysach clod sa fils yn spísri ar y filin agos na silen yn achlwas yn y súgur sa molas yn giol na galin binius na dwysyn ysbryd a lafar yn ôl. Coelag agad dwysach clod sgyn eri cosnag yn yr derge sgyn ega ddirig leis yn ardan Rahel Lodger son o gan alaile ush gan a tamed sgan vöv an darachis a hor Haro gawl son a spirish a chries an eich a mastring na la wallet a cwr a vanya na ul agus na blaich na hipper a broich ha Hewen Garsionig yn hir agos y lafeidir, char o bardig ag awn, char o sgwrs o ffon grein, a ffachgal diwyd fawn, bydd yn ienech yn sy'n nghria. A hwrt yn ienech yn rysiniol, mynd y glwys ag yn nghria, nach benwyd el a fawn, nach rosas a chygidir. Gos yn fferich ag a mawn, a hig a cwrs. Ga cars de chria. Gaat a hwrich ar isio grein, si moch am arach ar a fam, chwa gal glans a feiria, gws yn dreag is a chwan, gyn yn scala ar a fiol. Gaat a hwrich ar isio trwch a gwanas criel e mor wan, agos hiach yn i'ch yn eich endo i a heg a wa, ar yn wasglwg a ilch leis an á. Chamach ge iawach bwy y môr os cyn y chwlein a stad. Sal a lorog yn a mwyn i an o'r liad ys na'n siw a siol. Chamach ge heri ar y stor. Hei gorau, gwna chwm eisiau o wata. Caffalau. Hei.